everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Hello, Rush Nation, and welcome to the 5 Yard Dynasty podcast. As usual, I am your host, Liam, or at the FSA Tweets on Twitter, and joined by Rich, as usual, at Dynasty Island on Twitter. How are you doing, Rich?
I'm very good, thank you. Very good. I'm slightly stressed. There's a lot of charity drafts happening. I was feeling very, very happy and smug that my Scott Fishbowl draft was taking so long, but this morning, realising that there was another 3 drafts kicking off has not been great for the stress levels.
But we're not here to talk about charity leagues all the time, but we will be speaking about them in a little while. Before we do that, let's throw it over to Antonio. We've got one of our Dynasty writers here at 5 Yard Dynasty on the pod with us, as we've been doing for the past few weeks. So you can find Antonio at FF_LightsOut7. And he's also the co-host of the Play Action Pass podcast now. Antonio, how are you doing, mate?
Very good, thank you. Very good. Happy to be here. Looking forward to getting into this one with you both. Should be fun.
How's your FFCC draft started?
It has started. Round 1 complete almost, actually. So I'm pick 11, and I've just selected CMC. And it's on the 12th pick now, so I'm all right with that one. I'll get a quarterback on the way back, hopefully.
Nice. Liam,
how about you?
Well, I've not picked yet, as seems to be the case with every charity draft this year. I'm picking 12, so I'm just sitting in moaning. I think we're still at like pick 6 or something in my division. I think we're going to be a slow one. Liam, how's your FFCC going?
Well, it's at the point now where I'm struggling to pick at the 208 because I have no idea where to go. Quarterbacks have actually fallen.
I'm struggling to pick. I'm 2 rounds in. Yeah. Run out of players, you know, yet, Liam.
Yeah.
So, thanks, Rich. So in all of the charity leagues I've done this year, all of the quarterbacks, apart from the UKFFC, because that was weird scoring, completely super flex or uber flex, as people were calling it, and that was completely different. But all of the other drafts have been super flex, and therefore all of the quarterbacks have gone really early, whereas I'm at the 208 and I've got Dak Prescott on the board still. So
that's mad.
I feel like that's the pick.
That's the pick.
Most drafts I've spoken to have been really quarterback heavy. Certainly mine has been first 6 picks. I've heard 8, 9 going in the first round as being the norm. So, I think got smashed out there.
Seven of the first 8 were quarterbacks of mine. So, similar suit, Rich.
Yeah. Well, should we stop talking about the FFCC? As much as it's FFCC day, shall we dive in some flex talk?
Yeah.
Yeah, but first, Rich, I'm going to do the news because you brought it up. I snuck it into the show sheet, and then unfortunately, you don't get a choice. I'm going to do it. So, first of all, we had some sad news today that Chris Carson is retiring from the NFL. Rich predicted this a while back. His neck injury, I believe it was chronic. So it was always expected, but he's hung on. But now he is retiring, so don't draft him anywhere. And if you still have him, it's probably safe for you to drop. And then another little bit of news, very hurtful to me, but John Mechie from the Texans, the rookie coming into the league, second round wide receiver, he got diagnosed with a curable form of leukemia. So he's likely out for the season, unfortunately. But let's get away from some of the awful news that we've seen in the league. Let's try and hype this up a little bit. I've called the show How to Flex. So, Antonio, we brought you on so you can show everyone how to flex.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that on camera. Maybe if I was drinking.
So, We're going
So I think
to drink at the UKFFC, aren't we?
I think this was born out of Antonio's article that he wrote 7 weeks ago, something like that. One of the sections within that was about winning the flex, and basically we talked about it and thought it would make for a good topic on the show. So, I mean, in terms of your general approach to the flex spot within a dynasty draft, Antonio, how are you approaching that?
Yeah, you're right there. So it was born from that article, and the article actually was wrote as a bit of a lessons learned from last year, or actually it combined pretty much all my years playing fantasy, to be honest, into one article. It was quite a long one, and I really could have split it down into two really considerations. The first one being your draft kind of approach and your selections at draft during the draft, and then the other one was in weeks flex considerations, which we'll talk about now. But really, the flex spots when I was writing the article came from the back of the draft one. So if you don't mind, I just want to talk about the two draft approaches that I mentioned in this article, because it does the flex considerations do really follow on from that. So if that's all right, the first one is I'm quite keen, and I've learned really from recent years that you want to have a bit of a leg up on the onesie positions. So in your draft, I'm finding myself going tight end early and off in most drafts now. That seems to be the case. Whereas maybe if 5 or 6 years ago I would just focus on other positions and think the tight end group is so deep, I'll get one later. That's kind of changed completely now, and pretty much every draft I'm trying to grab a tight end early. And again, it's the idea of getting a bit of an advantage at the onesie positions. So I know there's so many formats we could talk about, but the article did follow a more redraft, one QB, one tight end approach when I was writing it. And yeah, on the back of that, really, I talk a little bit about Hero RB, which I wrote back in January this year, which I thought was the best strategy that I kind of fell into the last couple of years. And the fact that you can go Hero RB, which is obviously you take one stud running back and then you kind of flood all the other positions, allows you to get stronger in those onesie positions. So, where historically I was using robust RB, the approach of taking 3 or 4 running backs and then missing out on that tight end or QB or rushing QB especially. Hero RB allows you to do that. And that means then, when we get into the flex positions, your pool of you're essentially filling your wide receiver and your running back positions and your flex spots with a bigger pool of wide receivers and running backs. So I just wanted to say, basically, in the article I talk about those two approaches, and it kind of sets up what we're going to discuss for the future in this future hour or whatever for the flex spots. And Hero RB is the where I've fallen really, because I thought zero RB was a bit too extreme. Robust RB was extreme the other way. Hero RB seems to be a nice kind of position where you minimize the injury risk to your running backs by getting one. Okay, that one might get injured, but actually it allows you to attack other positions early in the draft. And then it's all about then fancying yourself to pick up some flex spots and trusting your knowledge as you go into the weeks to get those flex spots, I think. So yeah, what do you think of that?
What about? Yeah, I think for me, it's I never really go into a draft in Dynasty with any sort of set strategy about this is what I'm going to do, particularly at the flex spots. I might have a plan perhaps for the first 2 or 3 rounds, but I kind of think that it's kind of chaos after that, isn't it? Yeah. I think I appreciate this is coming slightly from a more redraft article mindset, and I think that's certainly something that we need to be considering more, and perhaps something that's underrated within Dynasty. But I think for me, it's a case of I basically am looking to accumulate the most valuable players possible, and perhaps don't focus as much on the flex area within the teams until we get into the season. And I think it's perhaps 2 different conversations, isn't it? Is that what you're doing about your flex spot in the draft than what you're doing in season, perhaps.
No, yeah, I completely. Sorry, I should have started. Really, this whole article was based around redraft, and I know this is a Dynasty podcast, and we'll get, the tips at the end where we can link them, hopefully both together. But the majority of the things I talk about on this pod probably will be redraft for this one episode. So, probably should have started with that. Sorry.
No, absolutely. We'll try and intertwine it all together. Yeah. I mean, so. Liam, I don't know if you want to start with we've got kind of a few questions, a few topics that we want to kind of dive through. I don't know if you want to start us off, Liam.
I'm not precious. You can ask the questions, really.
I don't want to be taken over. That's all. I appreciate I take over a lot of things. I don't want to be taken over.
You don't at all. So, Antonio, I'm going to stop Rich from taking over the podcast, and the first question. And this is from Rich's show sheet. I'm just going to point that out. To do the way that your opponents draft and how their teams kind of set out after, say, the first 5 rounds, does that affect your decision on what you do with your flex spots? Does it affect the type of players you take? Or are you always looking for a certain type of player for your flex spots?
So I think, again, if we're talking about in weeks, as in head-to-head in weeks, one of the things I used to do really was look at my opponent's team and look at how many fantasy points that team is projected to score, and then say, right, I need to hit some boom players, or my flex spots need to be some boom or bust here. Otherwise, I'm going to lose to this opponent because he's she's so strong. I've gone away from that completely now. One of the things I wrote in the article was basically try to forget pretty much everything who you're playing, focus on your team's scoring points, and everything will just fall into place that way, because there's so many variables that can happen. I used to look at, okay, that person's got a certain QB. If I end up taking that receiver or flexing that receiver, in my article I talk about Isaiah McKenzie and Gabe Davis. The other opponent had Josh Allen. Then I'm going to win when he or she wins with Josh Allen. But actually, that's not the case. That quarterback could easily run it in twice, as he did on that week against me, and it was a hard lesson. But if that quarterback runs it in, then not only does that receiver doesn't get anything really, the quarterback gets rushing as well. So there's so many things that could happen if you start. You could overthink it, is what I'm trying to say, if you start looking at your opponent's matchups. And again, I'm coming from it from a redraft week to week matchup based discussion at the flex spots.
Does that change for you in Dynasty? Sorry, Rich.
Yes. Oh, sorry. For me, it does. But go on, Rich.
Well, I was asking you. I was saying sorry to Rich.
All right. Yeah. Well, in Dynasty, it would change. I'm not too worried about kind of flex spot consideration at all in Dynasty. You're trying to get the most value you can, and the flex will just figure themselves out. Usually in a Dynasty league, you want to keep as much value on your team. I'm very much, as soon as the season starts, I'm really into redraft mode. I'll go 6 months or 7 months playing Dynasty, which I love. The whole point again into Dynasty 7 years ago or whatever is because I couldn't wait for the season to start. So I was like, okay, I need to do something in these 7 months. Dynasty football, found it on DLF with Ryan, and that was it. Game over for me. But as soon as this time of year, really, I'm coming on a good time, really, because I will start to try and focus towards redraft. I'll be taking in as much redraft content as I can, and all that will help the Dynasty teams. It can only help.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? Is that we've talked about it over the past few months in terms of player values and things like that, and I think that everybody turns, even in Dynasty leagues, into that slight redraft mentality of, okay, can I win this year kind of thing. And I think for me, it's interesting you talking about that flex decision and kind of, trying not to look at other teams' rosters and stuff. And for me, I genuinely don't ever look at the opponent's rosters at all. Outside of my home league, which is a little bit different because I'm conscious. I kind of try and remember who has everybody so that when we're doing trades and things. But in a normal Dynasty league, I genuinely don't look at who they've got at all. And I'll look at my roster, and then at the end of the week, I'll look at their points scored and being like, oh, okay, that's what they scored. And I think that perhaps that comes with being in so many leagues that I can't worry about individual performance and things like that. And I'm looking at players' points scored as a whole rather than in the individual matchups. But yeah, I think it's a great point of, don't basically try and, stack with the opponent's QB or try and don't start a player because this person's he's starting this person. And I think you just start your best lineup. And if that's the best lineup, then it's the best lineup regardless of whoever's on the other team as such.
I think I'm very similar, and it kind of comes back to your point of being in way too many leagues, Rich. I don't have the time to. I mean, last season I struggled to set every single lineup because it took me like an hour to set all my lineups.
You need a better process, Liam.
I was about to say I don't have a process, Rich. I don't sit there for ages, but like when you have that many leagues, you're struggling to set your own lineups. You can't look at someone else's. So, and the other thing is, if you did something or you played a certain player because your opponent was playing X QB or X whatever, or chose not to play someone because of that same situation, and then they make a last second switch, then you just screwed yourself over. For lack of a better term, you've just ruined your team, or potentially ruined your team because of a late second switch because you were trying to be a bit too clever. And to me, that I tried that in my first season, and I quickly got out of it because I realized it wasn't working as well as I'd hoped. But Antonio, so when we talk about players, and especially in Dynasty, when we're talking before the season, we're trying to predict how players do, especially if they're a rookie coming into their first year or whatever the situation may be. We always kind of look for good offenses, and then we also try and look at game scripts in terms of, the Jaguars might be losing a lot this year, so they might be throwing the ball a lot. That means that the wide receivers might see an uptick there, and we try and use these things to try and predict what is going to happen over a season. But when you drill it down to a weekly, a weekly process, do you look at individual matchups specifically and try and predict the game flow, predict whether it's going to be more of a run-based game plan or a pass game plan from either side? Do you look at the matchup in terms of the defense as well? How do you walk us through that? How do you look at a weekly matchup there?
Yeah, so this is probably the biggest consideration I give to flex spots consideration. There's a couple of things you said there, better offenses and obviously then greater time of possession. The bottom line is your players need to be on the field to score fantasy points unless you've got some sort of weird format going on. So better offenses means the chains are moved, means players are on that fantasy team will stay on the pitch for longer. That's the general rule, really, of that I like to consider. The first and foremost, if I'm looking for those flex spots, or if I'm trying to grab someone off the wire, it's the same thing in a redraft league. These flex spots could be the ones on your bench, but actually your better option could be on the wire. Let's not forget that as well, and even in dynasty leagues as well.
Yeah,
there'll be some dynasty wires that are loaded with players that can help your team immediately. So I did write in the article about offenses like the Jags and the Giants and the Jets. Sorry, Rich, last year compared to some of the other ones like the Bills and the Packers. Automatically they're going to be on the field for longer as they move the chains. So those players are the ones you want. And time of possession and better offenses, there is a correlation there. Which we can get into a little bit later. But you talked about something else as well, which is kind of game flow and maybe over-unders as well, Liam, which I like a lot. Yeah. And I think I've learned over the years to base my flex spots considerations on that now. So I'm looking at high over-unders, and if you look at what actually the Vegas lines or whatever they use in America, they're so sensitive to a few things. I did list them in the article, so I'll go through them. But basically, the weather has a lot to do with these over-under games. So that is something I'll look at. Is this going to be a windy, snowy game? I don't really want to flex anyone in that game in that instance. Or, the strength of the QBs. Is there going to be one QB who's really strong against a third stringer because the other two have got COVID this week or whatever? All of a sudden, you do not want players in your flex spots, usually from games that are blowouts. That's something I've learned as well over the last few years. The tendencies of those teams in your short game strips, I think, is massive. You've got one team who, if they go up, they will just run the clock out. You don't really want flex players even against that team because they won't get the ball that much. Packers come to mind. They're quite slow and they're always up. The last couple of years, Rodgers drains the clock quite rigorously. On the other side of that, someone like the Vikings, I'm choosing players against the Vikings and the Cardinals because they're so fast. Their pace of play is so fast. You not only want players on their teams, but you want them against them as well because they'll be on the field a lot faster. So yeah, loads of things to consider. Defensive injuries, you touched upon that one as well. That's a new one that I'm kind of focused a lot more on. And I think it might be because of COVID, because so many big time defensive players have been out the last couple of years with the protocol or whatever, and it's made a massive difference to the over-unders. So yeah, loads of things to consider. And you can overthink everything. You could just throw a dart, but why not?
No, I think it's a huge tool that's underutilized, if I'm brutally honest. I think that for me, as part of my weekly rankings, I take into account the implied team totals. So basically looking at the over-under, looking at what the spread is, and that gives each team an implied total of how many points Vegas think they're going to score, basically. And yeah, I kind of build back from there when I'm doing my rankings and try to take into account the difference of an implied team total of 21 compared to 35 is 14 points. So basically Vegas are saying one team is going to score 2 more touchdowns than the other team. Well, 2 more touchdowns for fantasy perspective is massive, isn't it? So I love the idea of using those over-unders and implied team totals when it comes to incorporating them into that potential flex spot. At the end of the day, normally when we're looking at flex spots, it's a case of you've started your 2 best running backs, your 3 normally best receivers, and it's looking for the best player. And once you're starting to get to that point, you've got choices, and a simple person that's going to be on an offense that's going to score the most points is a fantastic way to kind of potentially boost that and gain the most potential for scoring options there.
So when you say that you use over-unders, Antonio, what type of over-unders do you use? Is it purely just total points in a game? Do you use the specific teams over-unders, so team points, or do you go down into player prop bets where you're looking at how many yards someone is projected to get over-under wise? What type of, or how far down do you drill?
I go all the way now to player props, as you say. Just because I think it's only been recently since that's come out anyway, the last 2 or 3 years. But before that, it was always, okay, a team's going to be -4.5 or whatever. So you think they're going to be ahead or whatever, so they're going to run the ball more. The other team's going to throw a little bit more because they're going to be behind. It could be something as basic as that. Now I'm going down to the player props because I've kind of figured out that they're not a million miles away. We say it all the time, the bookies are never wrong, but they're not a million miles away. If you look at the receptions and the targets, I'm not sure they do targets, but receptions on receivers, for example, they're always around the right figure. And where it helps probably the most is if you're looking at a player. Let's give some examples here now. A player like Tim Patrick this year, we think he's going to be the 3rd player on that receiving core. We think he could be 2nd or 1st, but we don't know yet. But let's say he's the 3rd. And for me, the flex spots has always been something like, okay, do I really want the 3rd option in that receiving core versus the 1st option on a run first team? Let's say that's Jacoby Myers or someone else who runs the ball first, but is the 1st option. Again, I'm just thinking here. So Myers or Patrick, that could be a decision that a lot of people make. I'm looking at who are Denver playing this week? Is it going to be a shootout? Because I quite easily go for that third option over that first read, if you like, from New England in that circumstance. So yeah, it does help for those reasons.
So I'm just going to put this out there. I know that we don't normally talk betting on this podcast. So if you are struggling to follow because of the betting terms, me, Rich, and I'm sure Antonio are all open to you messaging one of us so we can clarify some of the terms. So I know that isn't something we tend to clarify. And when I was getting into betting and learning the betting side of things, that I struggled with some of the terminology. But passing it back over to you, Rich, how do you use over-unders? Are you, like Antonio, you drill all the way down into the player props, or are you just taking like the top level? I can probably guess the answer because I know what you like.
Surprisingly, I think you're going to be disappointed. I mean, I'm not a gambler at all. I'm be honest, I'm completely out of my depth, and I'd love to have the time to be able to go through individual player props and individual player over-unders, but yeah, I can't do that. So no, so I've got a spreadsheet that pulls implied team totals. So as I said earlier, that's team over-unders and team spreads. So implied team totals for each team, which helps me put together my rankings and projections on a weekly basis. But yeah, I don't go in looking for individual player props because I'd love to. I'd love to sit here and say, yeah, I think it's a really good idea, and I think, you know, let's be honest, Vegas don't make an awful lot of money just for the fun of it. So I think it's a really good idea, and I'd be interested to see kind of over the course of a season how accurate and sort of the results are of that. But yeah, it's not something that unfortunately I can do. And justify the time on that such.
So Antonio, coming back to you, I mean, we've spoken about tight ends a lot on this podcast. I'm sure you are aware.
I've heard, yeah. Number one fan,
so
yeah.
I have a strong stance on this, and it really depends on the scoring format. But in most formats, I don't use tight ends in my flex spots. But how do you use tight ends in your flex box? If you do, how do you choose a tight end over a running back or wide receiver?
It's rare. It's a very rare occurrence for me. You know, we're talking, obviously, I'll just switch my head to Dynasty now. We're going to have millions, I was going to say thousands of players on the bench. Why would we choose a tight end over someone who that we're going to have on our bench, let's be honest, in a Dynasty league, who are more likely, just by probability, to score more than tight end? Even in, I would say, tight end premium leagues, unless you got two of the top ones. And even then, I mean, yeah, you know, I'm not into flexing the middle tight ends. You know, you think of, I don't know, Gesicki or any of those. Unless you got two of the top ones, I wouldn't even be considering it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think for me, if I've got two of the top, probably 6, should we say, tight ends. So, you know, if I've got Pitts and Kelsey on a roster, then yeah, sure, I'm fine flexing one of those. But I think anything outside of that, at the tight end position, you're basically hoping for a touchdown each week. And I think that the volumes and the target volumes aren't there to dictate that you pick them over any other player. And I think basically anytime you're picking a player and hoping that they score a touchdown in a flex spot, I think you're on a hiding to nothing, certainly. Do you have, sorry, Liam, I'm jumping in with an initial question for that. Do you have a preference, Antonio, between looking at a running back in your flex? Do you have a preference to looking at wide receiver, or?
Yeah, so again, you know, wide receivers will probably rule if it's a PPR league, but I keep going back to the article was written really from a standard 1 QB, 1 tight end, 0.5 PPR, so half PPR. So you know, that's where our home league has been going for 12 years. That's what we use. I think we can have the conversation about floor and ceiling as well now, if you want, because I think it's linked. So the reason why I started off this whole episode really talking about the onesie positions, you know, if I'm stronger after the draft, if I'm stronger in those onesie positions, I will aim for floor in the flex spots. So usually my kind of tactic is, here RB, onesie positions are stronger than yours straight away each week. Therefore, I'm ahead Therefore, I will probably find someone with a safer floor to keep me through the week. And that served me quite well, if I'm honest, that approach. Now, if the onesie positions don't hit, you're going to have to go and shoot for the ceiling in the flex position. So I think they're so important, those onesie positions, really, to me, because they either give you an advantage that you're always ahead then and you just want to maintain that advantage, or you're behind. So that's how I treat those positions, really. And the flex spots will then follow. If I'm behind, I'm shooting for ceiling. If I'm ahead, or I think I'm ahead because Kelsey's going to outscore Irv Smith, then I'm going for floor.
So for me, and I think the way I like to build my rosters is that I build around those young wide receivers. I build around wide receivers. I put a lot of my kind of capital, should we say, around those wide receivers. And then running back is just a volume play. And I've got a lot of volume. And for me to start a running back over a wide receiver in the flex, I need to be able to realistically expect probably 15 to 20 touches as a minimum from that running back in order for them to be flex worthy for me. So that's basically one of the top probably like 20 running backs, or one of those backups that there's been an injury, Alexander Mattison last year in weeks where Dalvin Cook wasn't playing, I'd have really been happy to flex Alexander Mattison because he was probably a top 20 option for me. Whereas
he scored ridiculously high
Yeah,
points.
yeah,
So I think
exactly.
anyone that was playing him did, but yeah.
Okay, maybe not. Well, let's use current examples. If James Conner is
Why don't
injured,
you use Patterson as an example? You'd be flexing him, wouldn't you?
I was starting Patterson everywhere, mate. Don't worry. If James Conner, for example, goes down, then Darrell Williams is probably going to be in that flex conversation. Now, I could easily see a picture where he's going to get 15 to 20 touches without James Conner. So I'd be happy probably flexing him over the majority of wide receiver options. But unless a running back is going to get that volume, I don't feel comfortable, starting them in a flex spot. So at that point, I'm normally looking, wide receiver 40 or something. I would normally start wide receiver 40 over wide receiver 21, for example. I appreciate it's slightly different on a week-to-week basis, and there's a lot that goes into that. But I'd certainly lean more wide receiver heavy, but that's how I build my rosters. So that's always going to be how I lean at a flex spot, because that's just the way I play, certainly.
So does that affect you in your home league redraft week to week? Does your dynasty mentality affect you in your
I'll be honest, I'm going to give you a really rubbish response because my home league doesn't have a flex spot. So
wow.
we're two running back through wide receivers, and that's the only redraft. That's the only redraft league I play outside of the charity tournament. So in a charity tournament, I'm always putting, depending on the format, I appreciate, but a lot of them you're talking shooting for the moon, aren't you? So I'm generally, again, going for the wide receiver because I think they've got the higher potential of that spike week, and higher potential to score huge than a middling back end RB2, shall we say? What about you, Liam? Are you safety of a running back? Are you spike of a wide receiver in that flex spot?
I'm probably going to give a really boring answer, and
you're going to sit on the fence.
Kind of, yeah. I genuinely just go for who I think is the better play. It's really hard to kind of put into words. I don't look at a floor play or a ceiling play. I genuinely just look at a player and go, okay, I think this person on an average basis will outscore this person. And it's not as much as, okay, I have better onesie position, so I feel like floor will even me out and my floor is better than his floor kind of thing, or their floor. And I don't necessarily think, I need a ceiling play because I don't think the rest of my team is good enough. So I will play whoever I think will score more points that week. And it sounds so boring, but there's no consideration of, he's got a higher floor. The only time that extra bit comes into it for me is where I've got two players that I would class very similarly on a week-to-week basis, and then I'd go for the highest ceiling play because I'd much rather have the boom week than just a safe floor safety, I suppose, blanket. So really boring answer of I'm just going to play the one that I think is better, but I don't really go directly to a ceiling play. The only time I will do that, and I'll caveat it, is when I'm playing in a rebuild. I will play the highest ceiling, like the highest boom bust plays, because it'll either help me with my rebuild or it'll show someone up that a rebuilding roster has just beat them. That's the only time I'll play.
Is this the NFL? The NFL, you if they're on your bench, then you don't get film on them, and you can't sell them for a profit. They've got to be in a starting lineup if they
exactly.
Right. Okay. Exactly. That's an interesting point, to be honest. It's something I've never even thought of. But I wonder, if a player goes off or scores well, are you more likely to be able to kind of, I guess, flag him to the rest of the league if he's in your starting spot than on your bench? It's an interesting one.
I think that goes down to the intelligence within the league, because the amount of times that someone like an MVS or Sammy Watkins, these guys that you class as boom bust players, go off and then you see no trades in your leagues because no one's willing to take the shot on them that they're going to be that. I think it's where it's something like a Claypool a couple of years ago where he had that monster game and then you saw a lot of moves because it was the first time he actually did something.
Yeah.
That's probably where you see it. Or say the first time he did something. The first time he properly broke out. But that's a different episode. We don't need to talk about that. We're going to make Tom Strachan, the Stack King, absolutely happy by this segment and this question, Antonio. But we're going to move on to a bit of stacking now, and whether that comes into consideration for your flex spot. So if you have a quarterback or how do you then have like a tiebreaker in your head that, say you've got Dak Prescott, are you then thinking, I'll play Gallup over X player because I want that stack? Does that actually come into your evaluation?
Yeah, it does for me. So it is a good tiebreaker that I use. Simply,
so it is only a tiebreaker. It's not a.
It's a tiebreaker. No, well, going back, either again, go back to the kind of the way the article is written. You're either drafting, you're doing two things really in redraft leagues. You're drafting, or you're picking your flex spots because everything else should be set. So during a draft, it will be a consideration, but it won't be. I'm not reaching for a stack usually. If I'm going to stack in a draft, usually I do look to stack the QB and tight end, just because what Rich said earlier. If tight end's going to score, he's going to score a touchdown. So why not match that with a QB? So I'm usually more likely to stack tight end with a quarterback, if I'm honest. Therefore, the flex consideration doesn't really come into it, even because I just overlook the tight ends, even if I've got that QB. However, if I'm between a running back and a wide receiver, I will look at a tiebreaker being the stack, especially if it's a high-scoring team that likes to throw the ball. We talked about that earlier, and the tendency of the team. Dak's a good example of that. Kyler and just high-scoring, quick-moving teams. Would be a consideration for me for stacking.
So I've got a follow-up question, but first, Rich, do you have any opinions on stacking around when it's a quarterback and then your flex spot?
Yeah, it's a tiebreaker for me. It's not anything more than that, I'm afraid. I think in a draft, it's a slightly different approach. I'd probably give a little bit of a bump, but yeah, it's if there's two guys that I've got ranked or projected near each other on any given week, then I'd give the nod to the stack, but I'm not going out of my way. I wouldn't, if I've got, say, wide receiver 30 and wide receiver 45 in my rankings, there's no way I'm starting wide receiver 45, even if it's the stack, because that's too much value to be giving up. But yeah, if it was, wide receiver 30 and wide receiver 33, and the wide receiver 33 was the stack, then I'd probably lean that way.
So, question for both of you, but let's come to Antonio first, and then Rich can share his opinion after. We've obviously just spoken about the quarterback and then a skill position player as a stack, but when we take stacks to a different level and we say you've got a running back or a wide receiver, or even a tight end in your normal positional only spots, does that then affect your flex spots? So say you've got a CD Lamb in your wide receiver spot, does that then affect, say, this is probably an awful example, but say Tony Pollard in your flex spot, does that affect it? Or do you not really care about between positions for your flex spot?
So same position, same team.
Same team, different
position. Yeah. So would I go away from that? The answer is it definitely depends on the offense. This one. So if it's a high scoring offense, usually I'm okay with 2 people starting on the same team, and that's usually. I know you're taking away a ceiling there a little bit because only one player can score at one time. So if they're down at the red zone, only Pollard and only Zeke. Pollard and Lamb in your example, only one of them will score and get 6 points for you. Yeah. However, if you're confident that team's going to be down in the red zone a lot, why not? Because there will be games where you might choose
both of them get
Pollard. Yeah, absolutely, and enough touches as well. So it's amazing how much that time of possession matters for me. Those considerations that we talked about earlier: time of possession, throwing the ball, all those dependencies on game flow makes a huge difference. I got no issues starting 2 players from the same team if it's the right situation.
How about you, Rich?
Yeah, I think 2. I mean, it depends on the size of your league. If you're starting, 7 or 8 starters, or if you're starting, I'm in one league that starts 18 offensive starters. So starting 2 or 3 from the same offense is okay. I think 2 is okay. 3 is normally where I'd kind of start to draw the line, unless the implied team total is ridiculously high. If it's Bills when they're fully firing, and you're looking at starting potentially this year someone like Dawson Knox, Stephon Diggs, and Gabe Davis. If the other guys that I'd have to start over them aren't near them in that weekly rankings, then I'd be fine with that. But I certainly probably would start to bulk 3, and definitely not 4 from an offense. But 2, you've got to paint yourself a picture, haven't you? Most, it's fairly standard that 2 players will score decent points from one offense. If it's the third receiver and second string running back, maybe you're struggling a little bit there anyway. But if it's Dalvin Cook, Justin Jefferson, you're starting them every week, whether they're from the same team or not.
Yeah, well, I was more talking about flex spots. If you've got Justin Jefferson in your flex spot for anything other than
showmanship,
time of games that are happening, and he's playing on a Monday night or something, then I'm worried about you. But
maybe
Antonio,
I've just got some absolutely stacked dynasty rosters where Justin Jefferson's like my wide receiver 4.
Because Rich has gone
wide
receiver. Yeah, I'll put the 18 starter.
Yeah,
I would like to see that.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'll be honest. It's an orphan that I've taken over this year, and it is horrific. So it's not pretty sight.
Starting the excuses early, I like it. So we're going to move on to the final flex spot that we haven't really talked about in terms of what you do with it, and that's probably because we were all, myself and Rich, I don't know whether you're the same, Antonio, we're kind of under the assumption that everyone just plays a quarterback in their flex spot. But is that something that you look at specifically, or does it depend on the quarterback that you've got in there? How do you handle your flex spot, especially within the season?
Yeah, okay, so now we're thinking more along dynasty rosters. I mean, I'm of the opinion of you can never have enough quarterbacks on your dynasty rosters. Everyone says 3 is a minimum, but that's for standard 12 or 10 teams league, because obviously 3 times 10 is 30. So you're looking at having the minimum amount of starters. But actually, we've seen it over the last few years. COVID again coming into it, taking quarterbacks out last second, injuries. You want the reason why you want to be deep in that position is because you want to start a quarterback in the super flex spot if you can.
Unless you've got Justin Jefferson for your super flex spots, yeah.
Unless you're rich, yeah. However, I would say, I'm thinking about actual games that matter or examples in my team. Last year, for example, I think, or the year before, Teddy Bridgewater was on the verge of a starter. He was my super flex starter, and I had other options that I could throw in there, but I would just start Teddy because even on a bad day, really, you're looking at around about 12 to 16 points for running back that Rich talked about earlier. Especially a running back, to get that amount of points needs to touch the ball 15 times or more. I think I agree with you on that one, in any format. So straight away, you want to be starting a QB over a running back or a tight end in my position. Opinion. So really, it's the wide receiver. If you're really deep in wide receiver, then you probably can. But I usually lean floor, especially in the superflex position, because it could go horribly wrong for you if you go and boom bust in that spot. Again, against an opponent who's got two strong QBs, you're in a world of trouble, I think.
Rich, are you similar in that aspect that you basically exclusively have that as a quarterback spot?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, I view a super flex spot as a second quarterback spot. Certainly with the way I build my dynasty rosters, I try not to have two starting quarterbacks. I try to have at least three, if not four, maybe even five. So if I'm in a world where I've got better players than my second quarterback option, my roster must be incredible, because I think that the floor that a quarterback gives you, but also that potential ceiling, is basically unmatched outside of maybe 10 position players on a given week. Like, I could see myself starting QB 28 over like wide receiver 10 most weeks. So yeah, even if it's like a spot start for an injured, even if Tua goes down and it's Teddy Bridgewater's the quarterback in Miami, chances are I'm probably starting Teddy in that superflex spot over pretty much any other player. Okay, yeah, there'll be some extreme instances where, who was the Broncos wide receiver? Was it Kendall Hinton? Yeah, that was the one. Yeah. So when he started, I probably wasn't starting him in my superflex spot, shall we say.
A lot of people were starting him in normal flex spots because it was a wide receiver.
Yeah, well, this is true.
I'm just glad that bit him in the back.
But yeah, I think a normal starting quarterback, if they're a competent quarterback, I'm starting them over pretty much anyone. I think it gives you a massive floor, and that ceiling is unrivaled, basically. So yeah, I'm to sum up quite nicely, Liam, I view a super flex spot as a second quarterback.
So we could have saved 2 minutes from when you said that.
Sorry, right? I didn't realise that the listeners were paying per second of advice we were giving them. I'll remember that for next time.
Oh dear.
So Antonio, that comes to the end of a grilling, I suppose, questions. But you have a dynasty tip for us, and the listeners don't turn off, because I know we normally go straight from dynasty tip into the end of the show, but this is going to be a bit of a meaty one. So, Antonio, do you want to take it away with the dynasty tip? Because I'm pretty sure we could take this for a good conversation.
Oh dear, I'm scared.
Team up, it's got to be good now, Antonio.
I know. Well, to be honest, I was gonna, because we spent so long talking about redraft, or I have in the article and on this show. I really wanted to just make sure that we talked a little bit about it, but as soon as this time of year comes around, if your team is, if you are declaring your team as a win now team, so Rich and Liam, you're in loads of dynasty leagues. What I like to do is I like to go down each one before the season starts and say, right, where am I? Am I win now, or am I rebuild? Am I pretender, contender, whatever you want to say? If you are declaring that team as a win now, you really need to be taking in as much redraft content as possible. You need to treat that league as a redraft league. You need to go all in. Otherwise, you're going to be caught in the middle. So because you're saying that's a redraft league, and this is basically why I wrote the article as well, and why it's appeared on a Dynasty show, is because if you're saying, you're ready to win, you go all out and win, and you do the rankings, and you'll have redraft rankings that, obviously 5 yards do redraft rankings, and they do Dynasty, for example, but you'll see loads of other sites do redraft and Dynasty. Why are you looking at Dynasty rankings, even if you're in a Dynasty league, if you've declared that team as a win now? So that's all I would say as a Dynasty tip. Go down each league, each team that you've got, be honest with yourself, see if it's a win now or rebuild, and if it's a win now, start looking at those redraft rankings and forget about Rich's Dynasty rankings and try and attack the league.
Yeah, I think I'm probably a little less bold than perhaps you are, Antonio. I think it's something that's not talked about enough, and I think that there's a line to tread between going full redraft and making short-term decisions that will come back and haunt you in 3 months. But I also do think that people in Dynasty leagues, certainly that I've played in, are too happy having a good team and making the playoffs. And okay, it's another league. I've made the playoffs. I've not won, but I was respectable. I now get my 108, 109, 110 and get an average first rounder and move on to next year, where probably you'll make the playoffs and not do anything more than that. So I'm all in on the idea of you either want to be winning or rebuilding. And I think that, making some aggressive moves in season is a really good idea. And when you say aggressive moves in Dynasty, people think that means trading future picks. And it doesn't necessarily have to mean that. It can mean, can you trade a Kadarius Toney for Adam Thielen, in that, you're giving up that younger wide receiver, but you're telling me any player would rather Kadarius Toney over Thielen for this year? I'd be shocked. But most people are going to want, Kadarius Toney next year. So I think that making those moves is really good, and you can be aggressive. I probably wouldn't go all in on let's start looking at redraft rankings, but I get the point in that I think too many people sit on the fence and say, I'm happy just being good. And for me, it's either, and this is particularly true in cash leagues, isn't it? In that, what's the point in being in cash Dynasty leagues if you're just basically bankrolling someone else if you're not gonna, you're gonna make the playoffs and not win. So yeah, I like the idea. What about you, Liam? Are you as aggressive as Antonio, or do you sit on the fence a bit more like me?
I'm probably in between both of you, which is
again,
I don't know how.
Liam
I'm on the fence about being on the fence. That's saying something. So I do take redraft rankings into consideration, and I probably take them into account from what you said, Rich, way more than you do. But I'm not someone that will disappear or basically bin my spreadsheet of Dynasty rankings and ignore them completely. Obviously, age always plays a factor for me, but when I'm going through a win now roster, I am less worried about picking up someone that is 28 to 30 years old, even though they haven't got the value anymore because of their age. I'm still going to get a good couple of years out of them, and that's basically all I'm wanting from those type of players. And those are the guys that I'm looking at picking up and being more aggressive for. I mean, your favorite player, Cordero Patterson, at the moment is a great target because he's old and he's basically unwanted from a Dynasty point of view. But if he has another season like he did last season, he's another league winner. And yet he's basically already shown that he can do it. So those are the guys that I'm more skeptical with because of their age and the fact that they could basically just be out of... If Cordero Patterson has an awful year and goes back to what he was before last year, he's out of the league in 2 years' time minimum, I'd say. But
you can say that with any running back, though.
Yeah,
any running back is, apart from the guys on big contracts, any running back is one season away from being an afterthought.
And that's going back on Rich's strategy. Rich obviously likes to, I'm gathering this now. Load up on wide receivers, young stud wide receivers. So his dynasty rosters must look like, on Sleeper, a lot of blue. I've seen the drafts that you do, Rich. You end up hammering running back later throughout the rest of the draft. However,
he starts a lot of blue, and then his bench is just green.
So if that's how your dynasty teams look when you come to week one, I've played in so many redraft leagues over the years. I've never seen, really, it's rare, a redraft team to win being weak at running back. So you're going into that season behind, in my opinion, most teams.
No.
Because okay, one of those running backs could hit easily. Most of them do. You've got enough. I'm not saying that, but it's rare, and I think if you be honest, Rich, it's rare that a fantasy team will win being weak at running back. I haven't seen it much.
No, I agree, but that's the beauty of I'm building my dynasty for the long term, but I can be aggressive. If I think I'm a running back away, I've got no problems trading a young wide receiver and a first round pick to go and get a stud running back that will help me in that year.
Yeah.
Just because I build my dynasty teams in the off season and in drafts that way, I've got no problem with going out and acquiring a running back. The thing I don't like doing is rostering running backs in the off season, because I always fear that I will have a Cam Akers or a J.K. Dobbins situation last year where you've got this so much value tied up in the running back position, and can lose their value instantly. So I would rather overpay to acquire a running back in September than I would pay correct price in April and run the risk of rostering for the next 5 months.
That's great strategy. But what you're doing there is you are looking at redraft rankings, because you're getting a Connor, Fournette.
Yeah.
One of those players. So that's what I was trying to say with the tip. If you're ready to win, you look at those players like Fournette and Connor last year. They are going to be lower on dynasty mindsets, but they're the ones who are going to help you win. And I think we can pick a few this year. Probably won't be those names because they're higher up. But there are some running backs that, Rich, you just said it. They go out. If you're setting out to win and you're one running back away, take in that redraft content and go and get that running back to help you win. I think that's
absolutely. And it's I love the idea, and it's certainly something that I will do with the running back position. Like I'm buying a lot of Aaron Jones at the moment because I think that people are throwing him on the scrap heap because they're saying, "Oh, this is his last year in Green Bay," and it's like, for me, with the way I build my rosters, I only need a running back for a year. Like, give me all the Aaron Jones. He can be worth nothing after this year, but he's going to carry me to a title this year.
He may not also, just to put it in there, he may also stay for an extra year because of that contract. It's not, although they save a lot, it's also not that much.
I thought you were saying,
I'm pretty sure you told me Aaron Jones had 1 year. I was the one who was saying Aaron Jones has got a couple of years left in Green Bay.
So I was very adamant, and Rich was as well, that Aaron Jones had 1 year left.
He's got three.
I've gone through camp. It's
he's got 3 years left on his contract, but they can move on from him after 1 year, after the end of this year. I think they can save something like 8 million. It would mean they're paying him like 18 million next year if he's on the Packers, which, considering that's more than like Christian McCaffrey is earning, and considering they're going to be paying their quarterback like 50 million. Oh, here you go. I've got the exact numbers in front of me. So he's got a dead cap hit of 9.5 million. If he's on the roster, his cap hit will be 20 million. Yeah. So they can save 10.5 million by moving on from him, which, to me, when you're saving 10.5 million to move on from a running back and you've got AJ Dillon sat there, I really think Aaron Jones is going to be a free agent at the end of the year.
Is it common though because they give him a 4-year deal, yeah?
Yeah.
Yes.
So he would be going out after year 2 of that 4-year.
Yeah.
Is that common?
For running, it depends on how the contract's built. This contract was, from the moment he signed it, It was a 2-year.
I just can't think of
It was
many.
a 2-year deal with 2 years added on. It all depends on the structure, because the way the Packers structured it, there was small cap hits in the first 2 years with not a huge amount guaranteed after that. So it was basically a 2.5-year deal, and then massive cap hits in year 3 and 4, but they weren't guaranteed. So it looked, it looked really like a really big high-paid contract for the agent. So he gets his little win. Aaron Jones gets a nice little bit of guaranteed money up front, but actually the majority of the contract was just fake money. So it was a 2-year deal, and as I said, they can save $10.5 million from moving on from him, which to me, I think any running back in the league, if you can save $10.5 million and say goodbye, I think you're probably doing it.
The only thing I'm going to throw in there is if the offense runs through him this year, like everyone is predicting, are you really going to cut a running back where the offense has literally run through that guy, and he has been the top target that is everyone is projecting him to be, that is scoring the most fantasy points? I mean, that's not going to come into the NFL, but has got the most yards on the team. That's where I am kind of.
The caveat is they could restructure.
Wavering a little.
I think there's no way that Aaron Jones is playing on his current contract next year for the Green Bay Packers. There is a chance that they could restructure and push more money down the road. They've got all the dead cap hit in the world for Aaron Rodgers 3 years down the line, so why not chuck some more down there? But enough about Aaron Jones. Then we came to talk about flex spots and ended up having a rant about Aaron Jones. So
good stuff.
Anyway, thank you, Antonio, for coming on the show. It's been brilliant to have you on yet again. Next week, listeners, we're going to have Paul on. I'll be talking about difficult conversations with him. And I promise to try and keep Elijah Mitchell and AJ Dillon out of it as much as possible. Rich, unfortunately, won't be there because he's off frolicking somewhere in England. I don't know.
I'm at the Commonwealth Games, mate.
Oh, there you go. He's moved closer to me, so that's all.
I'll be up north.
Let's not start this. Anyway, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week, guys. See you later.